the talk explain what that actually means to me, and well, hope that they help you as well. So let's say this is you. You're maybe a product manager, an individual contributor, maybe a people manager, maybe a designer. You're just a person that builds products that people love. But usually we are not just ourselves. And to be very honest and frank with you, as a product person, a lot of the time, we can't really build anything on our own. And sometimes it's good to remember that nobody is an island and we need other people around us. So our main job is to create collaboration and alignment. Like, we need to work together with a lot of people on our teams, developers, other designers, other product people, stakeholders. And we have to make sure that we all move into the same direction. So we might not be the ones directing the wind, but we're the ones setting the sails. That quote, I think, has been attributed to so many different people, so I'm not even going to attempt to put it into someone's mouth, but I do like it. We cannot direct the wind, but we can adjust the sails. So that's where we get that whole direction thing. So today I want to basically talk about how you can adjust those sails in different ways, and about the skills that will help you to actually do that. And one of the main things, like maybe the key to everything, is communication. And you might have heard a lot about communication. It's one of those things that we do talk about a lot. And at the same time, it's also one of the hardest things to do, to be really good at communication. So I have a few things that I have kind of learned over the years that I like to use or leverage within communication that just really help me. And one of them, or the first part, is that you need to be strong and explicit, which means to be clear and unambiguous. You want to be candid and just really, really honest. So it doesn't help you if you're just kind of vague about something because you're trying to stay super nice and like maybe polite and formal, but then you don't actually get a message across. Now, when I talk about honesty, I do not mean the whole concept of brutal honesty, because as you might be able to tell from the name, that might be a bit much. That's not what we want. We still want to be kind in our communication. And then there's the part of transparency. I like to call it radical transparency because it feels radical sometimes and it might feel very uncomfortable once you get started with it. It's one of these things that I've seen a lot of people struggle with. For some reason, I've never really felt very self-conscious about like my process and how I think. So in one of my first product jobs, I started to just write all my thoughts and ideas about a certain initiative down on a Confluence page. And those would be messy Confluence pages, and I'm pretty sure nobody actually read them because they got really long. But whenever I had a new information or something coming up, I would just add it to this Confluence page and would get longer and longer. And at the end of it, I'd be like, okay, this is the feature that I want to build now. And for me, that was just like, well, this is where I put my ideas, but it was publicly available. And my team was able to look at it. And because sometimes I'm just like, I cannot really follow you. You're being too wild and all over the place. But they could just kind of look at what I've written. My boss was super happy about it too, because he was just like, I know what you're up to. And I know that like I could look at it if I wanted to check up on you. But I also know that you come to me when you have big decisions coming up where you want my opinion or need me to make the decision for you. So it just has helped me in a lot of ways. It's always been like a positive thing for me. We also, of course, have the radical honesty that we already kind of talked about. Sometimes it's referred to as radical candor, which is also a book that I can really recommend, where it's just like the way you talk to people. Something that's important is to build relationships, to be candid with other people, because if you don't really know someone, you cannot be, or maybe you can, maybe you shouldn't be as direct as with someone that you already know, that you trust, where you know you have the other person's best interest in mind and the other way around. So you can be actually very candid with each other. And the other half, which only get one word on the little list here, but it's basically the other half, is listening. And I know it's hard sometimes because while somebody else is talking, you're already starting to think about your answer. And you kind of know like, oh, the idea that they're presenting right now, I have a way better idea. So you start kind of going on a tangent in your brain. And it's really hard to listen sometimes. So I would just recommend and maybe ask you to try this out, to listen to understand and not to listen to answer. Maybe think back of like one of the meetings you had today. Maybe you had a situation like that. So try to really understand what the other person is saying, ask some clarifying questions, and really be present in that moment and listen to that person. Because a lot of the time we miss little things, and our brain is very smart, but not always the best at making the assumptions to fill in the gaps. And then we might not actually be on the same page. And that means we're not going to be aligned. So if you think back, collaboration and alignment, we want to stay aligned. Alrighty. And to stay aligned, as I said, we need to walk into the same direction. And there's a bunch of things now. These might remind you of your classic frameworks and stuff. There are things that you can do to help define the direction that you're going in and the purpose. Why are we doing the things that we're doing? And where do we want to go? The big vision at the end, where we want to land, maybe 5-10 years from now, very futuristic. That is important because that's like the rough marching direction. We often have a mission. There might be some strategic intent and goals along the way that kind of lead you towards that big vision. How can I make that happen? And it's really important to communicate these things back to your teams. So you want to really give everyone around you context, explain the big picture, just the why behind it all. You can, for example, use storytelling to rally people around a common mission. And if you're into product, you probably know Marty Kagan. And he has said something that I really appreciate, where he says that he talks about missionaries versus mercenaries. So you want people that actually care, because they can outperform the people for hire any day. And if you make sure everyone knows the purpose, you're much more likely to not end up with a bunch of mercenaries who will just do whatever and not really care. And for the goals, there's also one thing that I have fallen into the trap of like not getting that right, and that is your level of objectives. Like, what level are you at? Because you need those goals to kind of narrow the playing field a little bit. It's just so much easier to be creative when you have a few constraints. So your strategic intent and your goals are supposed to be your guardrails, so that you can still be creative, but not get like totally off track, because it is the big vision that we want to get to. And if you create any of these artifacts or evangelize them, depends a little bit on your level. Are you junior, intermediate, senior? Are you in a managing position? And so you don't always create these, but it's always your job to evangelize and like make sure everybody knows. And one thing I always say to myself is, if I don't feel like a broken record talking about these things, I'm probably not saying them enough. I have a little story for you. It's a bit embarrassing for me, I guess, because there was negative feedback I gotten. And I felt so unhappy in that moment and very defensive about it, because I was like, how even? So what happened is I had a new engineer join my team, and we had sat down and went over the roadmap for the team, the plans that we had for the next months. ahead, which problems we wanted to solve, what were the initiatives we were working on already, and so on and so on. I took a lot of time to explain everything, and then we didn't talk about it again for quite a while. And a few weeks later, in a retro, that same person said, yeah, I really like that I joined the team. Like, it's super fun. A lot of things are great, but I really I don't even know where we're headed. I don't know what the roadmap says. I'm like, what's going on? And I felt so defensive in that moment. Because I was like, well, I told you about the roadmap. Like, how do you not know about the roadmap? But after reflecting a little bit upon it, I was just thinking, okay, you know what? For me, as a product person, the roadmap is my day-to-day job. Like, I look at that roadmap quite a lot. And I have to present it to different people. So I talk about it a lot. But that engineer on my team, he does not look at the roadmap all the time. He looked at it once with me. So that definitely wasn't enough. So learn from my mistake if you want. So the other half. So now we had the purpose and direction. Got to talk about those all the time. Super important to make sure collaboration and alignment are working out, right? And then the other half of it is a lot more around the people on your team. What's important here are the norms and values. So you really want to make sure you understand and clearly communicate how you with your team want to work together. I really like Tuckman's 4 to 5 stages of group development to just get a bit of an idea why this is so important. You might have heard about this before, or maybe not. I'll just go over them real quick if you're interested. Tuckman is the name. You can look that stuff up. It's a paper, I think it was written in 1969 or something. It's been around for a while. So he basically describes 4 stages of a group development. First one is forming. So the group forms, the people come together. Everybody's usually on their best behavior, but very independent and focused on themselves. And then there's a storming phase. That's kind of the moment where this group kind of sorts itself out. It's the time where trust develops and starts to get built. It's also usually quite chaotic and brings with it a bunch of conflict that you have to work out. And norming is the phase that then kind of goes into resolving this type of conflict. Finding, getting awareness of the competition within the team, but also of shared goals. Like, what do we as a group want to achieve? It's often that resolving conflict then will lead to actual cooperation. And that's something that you can support by making it quite explicit. And once you have all of those things figured out, then that's when the team can get to performing, where they're competent, they're autonomous. There's probably less conflict, or if there is conflict, it's healthy conflict. And roles are clear, there's a common goal, and so the team then usually becomes very successful in what they're doing. So they're performing well. So the things that you can do to help with this are coordinating during the norming phase, especially, coaching people, empowering the teams and supporting them by making those norms and values and the common and individual goals explicit and putting them somewhere. My favorite tool for this is the team canvas, but since this isn't about frameworks and tools, I'm not going to go into detail about it. But it's something that you can check in on regularly, and it helps you to just get all of these things out there. All right. So you might think, cool. You said you were going to talk about strategic skills. I have not seen any of those. What's up with that? Let's maybe really get into those in detail. I just want to very quickly kind of go into the words, like, why do I call them strategic skills? And strategic just means relating to the identification of long-term or overall aims and interests and the means of achieving them. So these are the things that help you long-term to really get to your goals, be it your product goals, but also personal goals. And if you look at tactical opposed to that, those are usually relating to small-scale actions serving a larger purpose. And they're usually made or carried out with only a limited or immediate end in view. So these are often like your hard skills. And then your strategic skills are usually what is often referred to as soft skills, human skills, but they have a bit of overlap into hard skills. So here is a bit of a list of strategic skills. Some of them I've already touched upon and why they're so important. Active listening, we've talked about that. How you want to listen to understand, not to answer. Super important skill. Can really get you so far. Writing. So I think probably fairly common for us product people is to write stories, user stories and epics and those kinds of things. Sometimes we'll do like a bit more of a strategic thing. There is a cool, the working backwards from Amazon is also something that relies on writing. So if you hone your writing skills, they can come in very handy in a lot of different situations in your product work. Being good at presentations and presenting. I am still always like rather nervous at the beginning of a talk or a presentation that I hold. But I've practiced them a lot, and I think most of the time I'm doing a pretty decent job now. So definitely something that can help you. It's not only for your personal brand if you want to actually go and like do talks at meetups and those kinds of things, but also within your team, towards stakeholders, towards upper management. Like, do you maybe have to basically pitch for budget? It can help you in so many ways. Storytelling, also mentioned that earlier. That is really a great skill to get people to really listen, to take in the things that you're saying. And I'm going to go on like a tiny bit of a tangent here, because I think storytelling is just such an interesting piece, because human brains are made for stories. And there are studies about that and stuff that back in the day, like caveman times, cavemen would sit, they wouldn't probably, well, this is assumptions because we weren't around when cavemen were around, but they probably didn't talk a lot during the day, but they would sit down at night around a fire and tell each other stories. And those stories they were not just entertainment. They were also important because maybe someone told a story how they encountered a saber-toothed tiger or something, and it would be a warning to others, and maybe they could learn like how to behave and what to do in that moment. So our brains have been hardwired for stories for a really long time. That doesn't mean anything has to be like a fluffy little story, and data doesn't matter anymore. Data are actually like, those are the details in your story. So you can actually even use data for storytelling super well. Really great skill to have. Drawing, it's one where a lot of people cringe and they're like, I can't draw and I don't like drawing. It doesn't mean it has to be like Picasso and like super beautiful. It's more about, hey, I don't know, here's like some stick figures and a few arrows and like a box here and something there. That's already drawing. And that can really help visualize something and get us a point across way better than writing a one-pager, maybe, not always. But it is definitely something where like sketchnoting, for example, like that is a really great starting point for some very simple drawing that can help you in your communication. Then we have facilitation. I often even say that product people are decision facilitators. Like we kind of create an information balance between all kinds of people and help them make the best decisions. And also literally just workshops. If you can't facilitate a good workshop or working session, a jam session with techies and designers in them or whatever, and make sure people stay focused and you just kind of work together and moderate that, that is so helpful. Then I have giving feedback on here. Now that one's also can be a bit tricky because it's hard to give good feedback that is actually helpful and developmental for people. I usually just go with the describe a situation, describe the behavior that you saw in that situation and the impact it had on you. That's a really good way to give someone feedback that they can understand, kind of be like, oh yeah, I remember that situation. So do it fairly quickly after it happened in a timely fashion. And that is then something where you can say, this impacted me in this way, which helps to not say like, oh, you always say this and this in that way, and I don't like it. Because that's not really helpful. But if you tell someone, hey, in that meeting, you said this thing, and I felt this way in that moment, makes up for a lot. Like it's a lot better of a starting point to then together maybe even figure out what to do next. And I got coaching in here, which is mainly just asking really good questions and listening to people and giving other people the room to figure things out on their own. You don't always have to present every solution to everything. As you can tell, all of these are pretty much communication related. It's just different ways to communicate. And that's not the only thing, because underlying under all of those skills, we do need to have the right mindset. And here, I think these are like my personal product people essentials that I would look for if I would hire someone, for example. This is like somebody's purpose-driven, humble. Remember when I said, like, you're probably not getting anything really done without your team? Yeah, so maybe stay humble. Being inclusive, and that can mean different things. That can mean in a diversity and inclusion type of sense, but it can also mean like which roles, which type of people do you include in which type of work. I've encountered many product people who would just be like, oh, I'm like, me and the designers would come up with the ideas and then we give it to engineering and they build it. It's just like, well, maybe get the QA person in there, get a dev in there. They have amazing ideas. Then we have passionate. I don't know. I love my job. I hope you love your job too. I think product is one of the coolest things out there. And it's also really hard. So if I wouldn't be as passionate, I might have run away already. Curious. If you ever meet someone who's not curious, that is just, I don't know, it just makes me sad, to be honest. Because there's so many ways in which curiosity helps you in your job when you're a product person. It'll help you to learn and continue to learn, because there's always new stuff coming up in the market, be it technology-wise, like the way to do product management, like behavioral science. Like there's so many things that are so interesting that can help you in your job. But also there are so many ways to learn about your customers and also maybe creatively solve their problems. So just being curious and staying curious about things, very, very helpful and flexible. I'm not the biggest Jeff Bezos fan, but he was right when he said, be stubborn on vision and flexible on the details. I think that is something that we as product people really, really need. So yeah, overall, I would say if you look at a product management job or product leader's job, we're actually really like people, right? We're in a people position in a way. So one thing that I also think is super, super important is your emotional intelligence. And I've had lots of discussions with people. Personally, I believe empathy is something that you can train and that you can get better at. You just have to be a bit more aware. I would definitely recommend to leave your ego at the door to get really good at building relationships. Assume good intentions, but don't stop there. Feedback the people. So I think assuming good intentions is very, very easy to get wrong. But assume good intentions. Nobody is like purposefully bad at their jobs. Nobody wants to be bad at their job. So if they do something that you perceive that way, probably wasn't on purpose. Also, a lot of the time, it's just a lack of context. So they know something that you don't know, or you know something they don't know. So assume good intentions and talk to the people. In German, we can, like, there's this word for trust advance. So basically, like, you give your trust in advance, and then people can lose it potentially. But it's not like, oh, I don't know you, so now you have to earn my trust, and it's going to be really hard work. Like, trust people first, and if they disappoint you several times for no good reason, you can absolutely distrust them. But maybe just start with giving them in advance. Resolving conflict, which is like often closely linked to the ego thing. And it can be so tough sometimes. But yeah, just try to take a step back. Try to have empathy for the other person, but also escalate if you need to. I once had a bit of a hard time with an engineer on my team. I kind of felt like he thought I was basically being an idiot and not doing my job well. And he thought I wasn't listening to him and I wasn't fully understanding why the refactoring was important to him. It was mostly about refactoring. I think maybe some of you can relate. And we both made assumptions and received each other's behaviors very differently, and interpreted in different ways. Also, we were like from slightly different backgrounds. He lived in a different country, so yeah, we just didn't do well. And anything that has worked for me before didn't work in that moment. So at some point, I went to the head of engineering. I'm like, you know, this person a lot better than me, and I'm so lost, and I don't know what to do anymore. Like, can you help me out? And they did. They gave me some tips, and they're like, hey, you should give them written feedback, because I know that that is something that this person then can kind of process in a different way and think about, and then get back to you. And that's what I did. And the person got back to me, and we scheduled a 30-minute talk to kind of resolve some open questions around the feedback, and then ended up talking for 2 hours, resolving all of our issues, and then ended up talking about Dungeons and Dragons. And so, you know, sometimes the communication part like can really, really help you. And then basically the other half of giving feedback is gathering feedback. So actively ask people for feedback, and learn how to take feedback in. I know it can be uncomfortable sometimes, but you need to breathe, kind of keep your fight or flight a little bit in check, and just listen and stay curious. When people tell you about it, maybe ask some questions to understand it better, and try not to get defensive. Also, even though it might be uncomfortable, it will help you make you a better product manager, and sometimes even a better person. At the end of the day, everything is about balance. You need these strategic skills, but you also need to have those tactical skills and know about stuff. And that way you can be the best product person out there. And don't forget to have a little bit of fun. Thank you.